Do you ever find yourself humming the theme tune to Grange Hill or craving a packet of Space Raiders from the corner shop? If so, you're probably an 80s kid, and you're definitely not alone. The 1980s in Britain was a time of wild fashion, unforgettable TV, and a kind of freedom that's hard to imagine today. For those who grew up in that era, the memories are vivid, funny, and sometimes a little bittersweet. So, let's take a trip back in time and see how many of these 10 things only 80s kids in Britain will remember. Are you one of them? Number 1. The school playground. First up, the school playground was the center of your universe. Before smartphones and social media, the only way to connect was face-to-face, and the playground was where it all happened. British Bulldog, Kiss Chase, and Conkers were the games of choice, and every scraped knee was a badge of honor. You trade stickers, swap sweets, and argue over who got to be He-Man or She-Ra in the next round of make-believe. The rules were simple, the stakes were high, and the friendships forged on those tarmac battlegrounds often lasted a lifetime. If you were lucky, your school had a climbing frame or a tire swing, but most of the time, all you needed was a bit of imagination and a lot of energy. Number 2. Saturday morning TV. There was nothing quite like waking up early, grabbing a bowl of Frosties, and settling in front of the telly for hours of cartoons and chaos. Number 73. Whackaday and the Wide Awake Club were essential viewing, and the presenters felt like friends. You'd watch Danger Mouse, SuperTed, and The Trapdoor, and then try to recreate the adventures in your own living room. There were no streaming services, no pausing or rewinding. If you missed it, you missed it. The adverts were almost as memorable as the shows themselves, and everyone knew the words to the Milky Way car race jingle. Saturday mornings were sacred, and the sense of community was real. You knew every other kid in Britain was watching the same thing at the same time. Number 3. The local sweet shop. No. 80s childhood was complete without a trip to the local sweet shop. The shelves were packed with treats that have since disappeared or changed beyond recognition. Blackjacks and fruit salads, sherbet fountains, Wham Bars, and space dust were all favorites, and a 10p mix-up was the ultimate prize. You'd agonize over your choices, counting out your coins and hoping for an extra fizzy cola bottle or two. The sweet shop was more than just a place to buy treats. It was a social hub, a place where friendships were forged and pocket money was spent with reckless abandon. The taste of a refresher or the fizz of a sherbet dip-dab can still transport you back to those carefree days. Number 4. 80s fashion. The 80s were a riot of color and experimentation, with trends that ranged from the sublime to the ridiculous. Shell suits in neon pink and electric blue, leg warmers over jeans and fingerless gloves were all the rage. Hair was big, really big, thanks to gallons of mousse and a love of perms. Boys sported mullets or spiky styles inspired by pop stars, while girls teased their fringes to gravity-defying heights. Swatch watches, plastic bangles, and badges pinned to every available surface completed the look. School uniforms were no escape from the madness. Ties were worn skinny and short, skirts were rolled up, and shoes were scuffed to perfection. Looking back, it's easy to laugh at the photos, but at the time, it all felt impossibly cool. Number 5. 80s music and school. Disco's music was everywhere in the 80s, and it shaped the way we saw the world. Whether you were into the synth pop of Depeche Mode and Pet Shop Boys, the anthems of Queen and the Police, or the rebellious energy of the Smiths and The Cure, there was something for everyone. Top of the Pops was essential viewing, a weekly countdown that brought the biggest hits into your living room. You'd tape songs off the radio, finger poised over the record button, trying to avoid the DJ's chatter. And if you were really dedicated, you'd save up for a 7-inch single from Woolworths, proudly adding it to your growing collection. School discos were a chance to show off your moves, whether you were moonwalking like Michael Jackson or awkwardly shuffling to a slow song. The 80s soundtrack is still instantly recognizable, a time capsule of joy, heartbreak, and endless possibility. Number. TV shows and family viewing. Television in the 80s was a shared experience. With only a handful of channels and no way to pause or rewind, You watched what was on, when it was on, and if you missed it, you had to wait for a repeat, if you were lucky. There were shows for every taste. Gritty dramas like Grange Hill and Brookside, hilarious comedies like Only Fools and Horses and Blackadder, and game shows that brought the whole family together, like Bullseye and Blockbusters. Children's TV was a world unto itself, with presenters like Philip Schofield and Sarah Green guiding us through a mix of cartoons, puppets, and live chaos. The Blue Peter badge was a badge of honor, and everyone knew how to make a Tracy Island out of loo rolls and sticky back plastic. TV brought us together, gave us something to talk about at school, and created moments that still make us smile decades later. Number 7. Video rental shops. If you were an 80s kid, you'll remember the thrill of a trip to the local video rental shop. Before streaming, before DVDs, even before most people had satellite TV, the video shop was a portal to other worlds. Rows of chunky VHS tapes lined the shelves, their covers promising adventure, laughter, or sometimes a bit of terror. The ritual was always the same. You'd walk in, greeted by the familiar whir of the ceiling fan and the faint smell of popcorn, and spend ages agonizing over which film to pick. Would it be The Goonies for the 100th time, or maybe something new like Back to the Future? The horror section was strictly off limits for most of us, but that didn't stop you sneaking a peek at the terrifying covers of A Nightmare on Elm Street or Poltergeist. And if you were really lucky, you'd get to rent a video game for your ZX Spectrum or Commodore 64, hoping the tape would load without a hitch. The video shop was more than just a place to rent films. It was a weekly event, a family outing, and a source of endless excitement. And let's not forget the heartbreak of finding your favorite film was already out, or the panic of realizing you'd forgotten to rewind the tape before returning it. Number 8. 80s gadgets. The 80s were a time of rapid change, when new inventions seemed to appear every month, each one more exciting than the last. If you were lucky, you might have had a Walkman, that iconic portable cassette player that let you take your music anywhere. Suddenly, the world had a soundtrack, and you could listen to Madonna, Wham, or Duran Duran on the bus, in the park, or under the covers at night. The sound of the tape clicking as it reached the end, the frustration of tangled headphones, and the joy of making your own mixtape. These were the small pleasures that made the Walkman a must-have accessory. And then there were the home computers, the ZX Spectrum, the BBC Micro, the Amstrad CPC. With their rubber keys and blocky graphics, they introduced a generation to the joys of gaming and coding. Loading a game could take 10 minutes, complete with screeching noises and flashing lines. But when it finally worked, it felt like magic. These gadgets weren't just toys, they were windows into the future. Number 9. 80s toys. The 80s were a golden era for playthings, with new crazes sweeping the playground every few months. Rubik's Cubes, Transformers, My Little Pony, and Cabbage Patch Kids were just a few of the must-haves. Action Man went on new adventures, while Cindy and Barbie vied for space in the toy box. Board games like Hungry Hungry Hippos and Mousetrap brought families together, while Pogs and Panini sticker albums sparked fierce trading sessions at break time. The joy of unwrapping a new toy on Christmas morning, the frustration of losing a tiny accessory, and the pride of completing a collection. These are memories that still bring a smile. Toys in the 80s weren't just things to play with. They were tokens of friendship, status symbols, and the stuff of dreams. Number 10. School dinners. School dinners in the 80s were legendary for all the right and wrong reasons. The unique aroma that greeted you as you entered the canteen was a heady mix of boiled cabbage, gravy, and something vaguely resembling meat pie. The menu was a roll call of British classics: fish fingers, mashed potatoes, lumpy custard, and of course, the infamous pink sponge cake with fluorescent custard. There were days when the food was barely edible, but there were also moments of pure joy. A chocolate concrete with mint custard, or a jam roly-poly that stuck to your ribs. The dinner ladies were legends in their own right, dishing out seconds to anyone brave enough to ask. And let's not forget the ritual of swapping pudding for chips, or the thrill of finding a stray sausage on your plate. School dinners were more than just a meal. They were a daily adventure, a test of courage, and a source of endless stories. But wait, if you've made it this far, you deserve a little extra. Bonus 1. British seaside holidays. For many families, a week at a British seaside resort was the highlight of the year. You'd pile into the car, armed with sandwiches and a flask of tea, and head for the coast. The weather was unpredictable, but that never stopped you from building sandcastles, paddling in the freezing sea, or braving the arcades for a go on the penny falls. Fish and chips eaten out of paper, the smell of salt and vinegar, and the thrill of winning a plastic toy from a claw machine. These were the simple pleasures that made British holidays special. Caravan parks, Butlins and pontins were the backdrop to countless childhood adventures, and the memories still linger long after the sunburn has faded. Bonus 2. The freedom of the 80s childhood. Finally, there was a sense of freedom that defined growing up in the 80s. You'd leave the house in the morning and not come back until tea time, your parents trusting you to look after yourself and your mates. You'd ride your bike for miles, explore the woods, and invent games that lasted all summer. There were no mobile phones, no GPS trackers, just a sense of adventure and the knowledge that you'd be home when the streetlights came on. It was a different world, one where you learned independence, resilience, and the value of friendship. So, how many of these memories did you recognize? Maybe you remembered all 10, or maybe just a few brought a smile to your face. And if you got the bonus points too, you're a true 80s legend. Either way, the 80s were a special time to grow up in Britain, a decade of colour, creativity, and community. The world has changed a lot since then, but the memories remain as vivid as ever. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, don't forget to share your own stories in the comments. Cheers to the 80s kids.